In this episode, we're diving into pastors who were eaten alive by snakes. From a pastor who thought he knew his rattlesnake well, forgetting its dangerous tendencies, to another pastor who believed his fate was enough to keep him safe from a venom bite. But first, let's start with our first story where experience does not mean safe. The calendar on Pastor Mack Wolford's kitchen wall showed Sunday, May 27th, 2012, the day after his 44th birthday. The morning sun filtered through the dense Appalachian canopy as the charismatic preacher from McDowell County prepared for what would become his final sermon. Born into the full gospel apostolic house of the Lord Jesus, Mack had spent his entire life immersed in the perilous world of serpent handling, following a tradition that stretched back nearly a century in these ancient mountains. Mack possessed the kind of magnetic personality that could electrify a congregation with a single gesture. His weathered hands, scarred from previous snake bites, moved with practiced confidence as he spoke about faith that could move mountains or handle serpents. Friends described him as fearless to the point of recklessness, a man who would drape venomous serpents around his neck and dance with them, sometimes shirtless, his eyes closed in religious ecstasy. His modest home in Bluefield contained a spare bedroom that served as a serpentarium, housing his collection of deadly vipers that he treated more like beloved pets than lethal predators. His own father had been a serpent-handling pastor who died from a snakebite, yet this family history only strengthened Mack's resolve rather than deterring him. He viewed his father's death not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that God calls his servants home when their earthly work is complete. This fatalistic worldview had shaped Mack's entire approach to his dangerous ministry, making him increasingly bold with each successful handling session. The day after his 44th birthday, Mack had organized a homecoming service at Panther Wildlife Management Area, a state park 80 miles west of his hometown. He chose this outdoor setting deliberately, believing that God's creatures should be handled in God's natural cathedral. The gathering drew dozens of faithful followers, their faces weathered by mountain life and hardened by unwavering belief. Among his collection, Mack had selected his favorite companion for the day's service, Sheba, a magnificent yellow timber rattlesnake whose brown and golden scales caught the sunlight like burnished copper. Timber rattlesnakes, scientifically known as Crotalus horridus, are among North America's most dangerous serpents, despite their generally docile nature. These impressive reptiles can grow up to 5 feet in length and possess a venom so potent that a single bite contains enough toxins to kill multiple adult humans. What makes timber rattlesnakes particularly treacherous is their patient hunting style. They can remain motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike with lightning speed. 30 minutes into his passionate service and delivery, Mack reached for the wooden box containing Sheba. The serpent, nearly 4 feet of coiled muscle and venom, seemed almost docile as he lifted it with practiced ease, a deceptive calm that had perhaps made Mack overconfident in his handling over the years. As Mack passed the snake from his left hand to his right, allowing it to crawl onto his shoulder in a display of ultimate trust, Sheba suddenly struck with the precision of millions of years of evolution. Her fangs, hollow like hypodermic needles and designed to inject venom deep into prey, sank into his thigh with devastating accuracy. The bite delivered approximately 100 to 150 milligrams of venom directly into his bloodstream, more than enough to kill several grown men. The congregation barely flinched at first. They had witnessed snake bites before, and their pastor had always emerged victorious, protected by what they believed was divine intervention. But this time was different. The venom coursed through Mack's system with ruthless efficiency, immediately beginning its systematic attack on his blood cells and nervous system. Timber rattlesnake venom works by breaking down cell walls, causing massive internal bleeding and tissue death, while simultaneously attacking the victim's ability to clot blood, leading to hemorrhaging throughout the body. Mack calmly returned Sheba to her box and took his seat, summoning every ounce of his remaining strength to maintain consciousness as the poison began its deadly work. Within minutes, the first symptoms appeared. profuse sweating as his body fought the foreign toxins, labored breathing as his cardiovascular system struggled to function, and a growing weakness that signaled his organs were beginning to fail. The congregation finally realized their beloved pastor was in mortal danger when he could no longer stand without assistance. They carried him to a nearby chair, then to his mother-in-law's house, where he lay surrounded by praying believers who refused to acknowledge that their faith might not be enough to save him this time. For 10 agonizing hours, Mack's organs systematically failed as the venom continued its relentless assault. His kidneys shut down first, unable to filter the toxins from his blood, followed by his liver as the hemotoxins destroyed his body's ability to produce essential proteins. The neurotoxins attacked his nervous system, causing seizures and eventually respiratory failure. The timber rattlesnake's venom was designed by evolution to be the perfect killing mechanism, slow enough to prevent prey from escaping, but thorough enough to ensure death. As Mack lay dying, his body was experiencing the same process that had killed countless small mammals over millions of years of predator-prey relationships. Only when it became clear that prayer alone would not save him did someone finally call for medical help. But by the time paramedics reached the Bluefield Regional Medical Center, the venom had done its work too thoroughly to reverse. Pastor Mack Wolford was pronounced dead at 10:30 p.m., another casualty in the centuries-old battle between faith and nature's unforgiving laws. His death would later be documented by journalist Lauren Pond, who had spent a year following his ministry and described the eerie stillness that fell over the congregation when they realized their spiritual leader was truly gone. While the mountains of West Virginia mourned the loss of Pastor Wolford, another serpent handler in Georgia was about to discover that even the most humble church service could turn deadly when faith collides with a rattlesnake's instinct to strike. The date, January 15, 1995, dawned crisp and clear in the small town of Enigma, a Sunday morning that would forever change the tight-knit community of barely 600 souls scattered across the rural Georgia landscape. The town lived up to its mysterious name in many ways, centered around 2 blinking traffic lights and a general store that doubled as the local gas station. But for 40-year-old Dewey Bruce Hale, this tiny hamlet contained everything that mattered: his family, his faith, and the New River Holiness Church, where he had found his spiritual home. Dewey was an enigma himself, in many ways, a gentle soul in a harsh world who had chosen an unconventional path through life. Unlike most men his age in rural Georgia, he had never married, choosing instead to dedicate his life to caring for his aging mother and maintaining his unwavering devotion to the church. His bachelor lifestyle wasn't born of antisocial tendencies. Quite the opposite. Dewey possessed a gentle, caring nature that endeared him to everyone in the congregation. He worked various odd jobs around Brookfield to support himself and his mother, from farm labor to construction work. But his true passion lay in the Sunday services, where he could express his deep, abiding faith. The New River Holiness Church itself was as modest as its congregation, a testament to the humble origins of the Appalachian Pentecostal movement. Dewey had been attending services here for years, watching other congregants handle venomous snakes with a mixture of awe and longing, waiting for the day when God would call him to demonstrate his own faith in such a dramatic fashion. The practice of serpent handling in Appalachian churches traced its roots back to the early 1900s, when believers began taking literally the passage from Mark 16:18 that promised protection from serpents for true believers. What many didn't understand was the incredible danger they were courting with each handling session. The rattlesnakes used in these services were typically eastern diamondbacks, or timber rattlesnakes, both species capable of delivering fatal bites with remarkable efficiency. On this particular Sunday morning, Dewey arrived early at the church, carrying a wooden box that contained his contribution to the service, a rattlesnake he had carefully captured and prepared for the day's worship. The serpent inside was likely an eastern diamondback, the largest venomous snake in North America, and one of the most dangerous reptiles on the continent. These magnificent predators can grow up to 8 feet in length and weigh over 10 pounds, with fangs that can extend nearly an inch when striking. Their venom is a complex mixture of enzymes and toxins that attacks virtually every system in the human body simultaneously. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are ambush predators that have evolved over millions of years to be perfect killing machines. Their heat-sensing pit organs can detect temperature differences as small as 0.003 degrees Celsius, allowing them to strike accurately, even in complete darkness. Dewey's hands trembled slightly as he carried the box into the church, not from fear, but from anticipation. He had been praying for weeks about whether God was calling him to take this step, to demonstrate his faith through serpent handling. He truly believed that his faith would protect him from harm, that God would honor his devotion by making him immune to the serpent's deadly bite. The service began with the pastor's solemn warning about the presence of serpents, a routine announcement that barely registered with the seasoned congregation who had witnessed such displays many times before. As guitars, drums, and tambourines filled the air with joyful noise, the atmosphere transformed from quiet reverence to ecstatic celebration. Congregants danced and sang, their voices rising in harmonious praise that seemed to shake the modest church's wooden frame. This musical frenzy was an essential part of the serpent handling ritual, designed to induce a trance-like state where believers felt most connected to the divine. It was at this moment the pastor recognized the significance of the moment and the spiritual state of his congregant, called out for Brother Dewey to come forward. The congregation fell silent, sensing they were about to witness something profound and potentially dangerous. With trembling hands, Dewey opened the wooden box and lifted the rattlesnake high above his head in a gesture of ultimate faith and surrender. The serpent, disturbed from its confined rest and suddenly exposed to bright lights and loud noises, coiled around his arm with muscular grace. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, time appeared suspended as man and serpent regarded each other in the hushed church. The snake's tongue flicked out repeatedly, tasting the air and detecting the chemical signatures of fear and adrenaline that Dewey's body was producing despite his spiritual confidence. Rattlesnakes are generally reluctant to bite unless they feel threatened or are hunting prey, preferring to conserve their venom for actual feeding opportunities. However, the stress of being handled, combined with the unfamiliar environment and the crowd of people, likely triggered the snake's defensive instincts. Then, with the speed that had made rattlesnakes apex predators for millions of years, capable of striking at speeds of up to 8 feet per second, the serpent struck with devastating precision. The fangs penetrated deep into Dewey's left hand, the snake's powerful jaw muscles driving the hollow teeth through skin, muscle, and into the small bones of his hand. The venom injection was immediate and thorough, with the snake's venom glands contracting to force approximately 200 to 400 milligrams of toxin directly into Dewey's bloodstream, enough poison to kill several adult humans. The congregation gasped collectively, but Dewey remained remarkably calm, his faith sustaining him even as the first waves of excruciating pain began to wash over his body. The venom began its work immediately, with enzymes starting to break down cell walls and blood vessels at the injection site. Hyaluronidase, often called the spreading factor, began dissolving the connective tissue that normally would contain the venom, allowing it to spread rapidly through his hand and up his arm. Dewey carefully returned the snake to its box, his movements deliberate despite the growing agony in his hand and the shock that was beginning to set in. As the service continued around him, his condition rapidly deteriorated in a pattern that medical experts would recognize as classic rattlesnake envenomation. The venom spread through his lymphatic system, causing his hand to swell grotesquely as fluid leaked from damaged blood vessels. His skin began to darken with necrosis as the toxins killed tissue faster than his body could repair it. Fellow believers surrounded him with prayers and hymns, their voices rising in desperate supplication as they watched their brother suffer. But Dewey refused all suggestions of medical treatment, his faith absolute in God's power to heal him, despite the obvious signs that his body was losing the battle against the venom. The pain was becoming unbearable as the toxins attacked nerve endings, but he interpreted his suffering as a test of faith rather than a medical emergency requiring immediate intervention. The hours that followed were a testament to both human endurance and the relentless power of nature's most sophisticated biological weapons. At his home, surrounded by praying congregants who maintained a vigil of faith, Dewey lay on his bed as the venom systematically attacked his organs. His breathing became increasingly labored as the neurotoxins began affecting his respiratory system. His heart struggled to pump blood through vessels that were leaking fluid due to the hemotoxic effects of the venom. The skin on his hand continued to blacken and swell as tissue death spread up his arm. No amount of prayer or home remedies could slow the poison's advance through his cardiovascular system. His kidneys began to fail as they tried to filter the toxins from his blood, and his liver struggled to produce the proteins necessary for blood clotting. The venom was essentially liquefying his internal organs, while simultaneously preventing his body from healing itself. By late evening, nearly 8 hours after the bite, Dewey's body finally succumbed to the venom's effects in a process that paralleled the death of countless prey animals throughout evolutionary history. He passed away peacefully, surrounded by those who loved him and shared his unwavering faith, his final breaths coming as his respiratory system finally failed under the assault of the neurotoxins. The sheriff's office wasn't called until after his death, and when they arrived, they found a community in mourning, but not in regret. Sheriff Jerry Brogdon later expressed his dismay at the situation, noting that probably 100 people had sat watching a person die without calling for medical help. But he also acknowledged that Dewey had died doing what he believed in, following a faith tradition that valued spiritual conviction over physical survival. The community laid Dewey to rest in the New River Holiness Church Cemetery, his grave becoming another marker in the long history of Appalachian believers who had paid the ultimate price for their dangerous devotion. As the people of Enigma laid Dewey to rest in the New River Holiness Church Cemetery, another snake-handling pastor in Kentucky was building his reputation as one of the most fearless serpent handlers in Appalachia, unaware that his own deadly encounter with a rattlesnake was just 2 decades away. Saturday, February 15, 2014, marked what should have been another routine service at the Full Gospel Tabernacle in Jesus' name, but instead became the date that would end the legendary career of one of Appalachia's most famous snake handlers. The church had been a cornerstone of faith in the Kentucky mountains since Pastor Jamie Coots' grandfather founded it in 1978, and by 2014, 42-year-old Jamie had transformed the modest church into something of a pilgrimage destination for believers and curious observers alike. His reputation as a fearless snake handler had spread far beyond the Appalachian hills, earning him features in National Geographic documentaries and drawing visitors from across the country who came to witness his extraordinary displays of faith. Jamie possessed a unique combination of charisma and recklessness that made him both beloved and controversial within the serpent-handling community. Before finding his calling in the church, he had worked as a truck driver for local mines, a job that had given him a practical, no-nonsense approach to life's dangers, while also developing the physical strength and mental toughness that would serve him well in his later ministry. But it was his childhood fascination with serpents that truly defined him, a passion that had been nurtured in a third-generation snake-handling family, where handling venomous reptiles was as natural as Sunday dinner. Growing up around venomous reptiles since he could walk, Jamie had developed an almost supernatural confidence in his ability to handle them safely. His approach to serpent handling was more theatrical than most pastors, reflecting both his natural showmanship and his absolute conviction that God would protect him from harm. Jamie didn't simply hold snakes during services. He performed with them, allowing multiple rattlesnakes to coil around his arms and shoulders simultaneously while he preached with passionate intensity that could electrify even the most skeptical observer. His collection included some of the most dangerous species in North America: timber rattlesnakes, copperheads, and cottonmouths, each one capable of delivering a fatal bite with remarkable efficiency. Over his 22-year career as a snake handler, Jamie had been bitten 9 times, each incident only strengthening his conviction that God was protecting him and using these trials to test and purify his faith. The scars on his hands told the story of his dangerous devotion, like a roadmap of divine intervention. The most serious of these previous encounters had occurred in 1993, when a particularly aggressive timber rattlesnake had delivered a near-fatal bite that left Jamie unconscious for days, while his congregation maintained a prayer vigil around his bedside. The venom had caused massive tissue damage and organ failure, but Jamie had somehow survived what doctors later described as a medically impossible recovery. Another encounter in 1998 had cost him part of a finger when a copperhead's bite had caused such severe necrosis that amputation was necessary to prevent the tissue death from spreading up his arm. But Jamie wore these wounds like badges of honor, proof of his willingness to risk everything for his beliefs and evidence of God's protective power over those who truly believed. Each survival had made him bolder, more confident in his ability to handle increasingly dangerous serpents in increasingly dramatic ways. What he didn't understand was that each bite had also been building up antibodies in his system, while simultaneously causing cumulative damage to his organs that would eventually prove fatal. His fame had brought both admiration and legal troubles that reflected the complex relationship between religious freedom and public safety in modern America. In 2008, he had been arrested for illegally trafficking snakes across state lines, his obsession with acquiring new and more dangerous species having led him to break federal laws designed to prevent the spread of invasive species and protect both humans and ecosystems. The incident had forced him to obtain proper permits and follow regulations, but it hadn't dampened his enthusiasm for collecting ever more lethal serpents for his services. The legal troubles had also brought unwanted attention from animal control officers and state authorities who viewed his practices as dangerous to both participants and the broader community. Jamie had received multiple warnings about the safety of his services, particularly after a tragic incident in 1995, when a 28-year-old woman in his congregation had been killed by one of his rattlesnakes. The woman had stepped forward to handle the serpent during a service, believing that her faith would protect her, but the snake had struck her arm and delivered a fatal dose of venom. Despite the tragedy occurring with his snake, and under his spiritual guidance, Jamie had never been held legally accountable, though the incident had haunted him and strengthened his belief that God calls his servants home when their earthly work is complete. On that cold February morning in 2014, Jamie prepared for what would become his final performance with the same meticulous care he had always brought to his serpent handling. The church was packed with regular congregants and visitors who had traveled hundreds of miles to witness the legendary snake handler in action, drawn by his reputation and the National Geographic documentary that had made him something of a celebrity in certain circles. Among his collection for the day were 3 magnificent rattlesnakes, their scales gleaming under the church's fluorescent lights as they coiled restlessly in their wooden boxes, sensing the excitement and tension in the air. These were likely timber rattlesnakes, the species most commonly used in Appalachian serpent handling services due to their availability in the local ecosystem and their relatively docile nature compared to other venomous species. However, relatively docile was a dangerous misconception that had led to numerous fatalities over the years. Timber rattlesnakes are still incredibly dangerous predators whose venom contains a complex mixture of toxins designed to kill prey quickly and efficiently. The venom of a timber rattlesnake contains multiple components that work together to create a perfect biological weapon. Crotoxin, a powerful neurotoxin, attacks the nervous system and can cause respiratory paralysis. As the service reached its crescendo, with the congregation worked into the spiritual frenzy that preceded the serpent handling, Jamie lifted all 3 serpents simultaneously in a display that represented the pinnacle of his dangerous art. Their muscular bodies intertwined around his arms like living jewelry, their weight and power evident in every movement. The congregation watched in breathless silence as he moved with practiced grace, his eyes closed in religious ecstasy as he felt the serpent's muscles rippling against his skin. These moments represented the perfect fusion of danger and devotion that had defined his entire adult life. The attack came from his favorite serpent, a particularly large timber rattlesnake that had been part of his collection for years and had never shown aggression during previous handlings, perhaps disturbed by the presence of the other snakes, or simply acting on predatory instinct triggered by Jamie's elevated heart rate and the adrenaline coursing through his system. The rattlesnake suddenly wheeled around with lightning speed and sank its fangs deep into Jamie's right hand. The bite was clean and decisive, the serpent's hollow fangs delivering their full payload of venom directly into his bloodstream, with the efficiency of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. The timber rattlesnake's strike speed can reach up to 8 feet per second, making it virtually impossible for humans to react quickly enough to avoid a bite once the snake has decided to attack. The fangs, which can be up to an inch long in large specimens, are designed to penetrate deeply and inject venom under high pressure, ensuring maximum toxin delivery. In this case, the snake likely injected between 150 to 300 milligrams of venom, more than enough to kill several adult humans. Jamie's reaction was characteristically calm, reflecting both his experience with previous bites and his absolute faith that this encounter would end like all the others, with divine intervention saving his life. He had been bitten 9 times before and survived each encounter. This would be no different. He carefully returned the snakes to their boxes with steady hands, showing no outward sign of panic or concern as a small amount of blood trickled down the back of his hand, the only visible evidence of the deadly injection that had just occurred. But this bite was fundamentally different from his previous encounters, though Jamie had no way of knowing it at the time. Whether the snake had delivered a particularly potent dose of venom, or Jamie's body had finally reached its limit after years of toxic exposure and cumulative organ damage, the poison began working with unprecedented efficiency. His previous bites may have been dry bites, defensive strikes where little or no venom was injected, or his body may have developed some resistance through repeated exposure. This time, however, the full force of the timber rattlesnake's biological arsenal was unleashed in his system. Jamie retreated to his home adjacent to the church, confident that, like the previous times, he would be spared by divine intervention. His family gathered around him in the familiar ritual of prayer and faith healing that had sustained him through previous crises. But within hours, it became clear that this encounter was different. The venom coursed through his system with ruthless efficiency, immediately beginning its systematic assault on his organs in a process that paralleled the death of countless prey animals throughout evolutionary history. The hemotoxic components of the venom began breaking down his blood vessels, causing internal bleeding throughout his body. His blood's ability to clot was severely impaired, leading to hemorrhaging that his cardiovascular system couldn't control. The neurotoxic elements attacked his nervous system, interfering with the electrical signals that controlled his heart rate and breathing. Tissue-destroying enzymes began digesting his internal organs from the inside out, starting at the bite site and spreading through his lymphatic system. Jamie felt lightheaded and dizzy as he lay down on his sofa, trying to remain calm while his body fought a losing battle against the toxic mixture of proteins and enzymes. The familiar symptoms, nausea, weakness, and difficulty breathing, progressed far more rapidly than in his previous encounters. His heart began beating irregularly as the cardiotoxic elements of the venom interfered with his cardiac muscle function. His kidneys started failing as they tried to filter the overwhelming load of toxins from his bloodstream. Emergency services had been alerted by concerned congregation members who recognized that this bite was more serious than Jamie's previous encounters. But when paramedics arrived at his property, his family refused to let them treat him. Their faith demanded that they trust in God's healing power rather than human medicine, a decision that reflected the deep theological convictions that had shaped their entire worldview. Even as Jamie lost consciousness, they maintained their vigil, praying desperately for the miracle that had saved him 9 times before. The anti-venom that could have saved Jamie's life sat tantalizingly close in the ambulance outside his home, a cruel reminder of how thin the line between faith and folly can be. Modern antivenom is highly effective when administered quickly, capable of neutralizing snake venom and preventing the cascade of organ failure that leads to death. But the window for effective treatment is narrow, typically requiring administration within the first few hours after envenomation to prevent irreversible damage. But the miracle never came this time. 2 hours after receiving the toxic bite, a relatively quick death for timber rattlesnake envenomation, Pastor Jamie Coots drew his final breath as his respiratory system finally succumbed to the neurotoxic effects of the venom. His family watched helplessly as the man they had revered for his unshakable faith succumbed to the very creatures he had spent his life handling. His death serving as a stark reminder that nature's laws operate independently of human belief systems. In the aftermath of Jamie's death, his son Cody assumed leadership of the Full Gospel Tabernacle, continuing the family tradition of serpent handling despite the tragic loss of his father. The wooden boxes still sit near the pulpit, filled with coiled death, waiting for the next believer brave enough, or foolish enough, to test their faith against nature's most perfect predators. The cycle continues, as it has for over a century in the Appalachian Hills, where faith and fangs dance their deadly dance in humble churches filled with believers who refuse to acknowledge that sometimes even the most devout prayers cannot overcome the simple biological reality of venom coursing through human veins. Want to watch more types of these videos? Click on your screen now